Hi, my name's Seb Chan, and I'm speaking to you from Melbourne in Australia. And the time's about about 1 in the morning now. So good morning. And I'm going to be talking to you about museums and some of the work that I've done over the last 20 years in museums that might point to some of the ways forward. And of course, we've all been struggling around the world with the effects of COVID-19. And I think that's quite radically changing how cultural organisations and our institutions and our societies will emerge. My museum, where I'm working in Melbourne at the moment, which I'll talk about a bit later in this talk, has actually been closed for a year and a half to do a major sort of rebuild, but I'll get to that shortly. So let's get started. All right. So, this Anab Jane is a futurist designer from the UK, and back in 2014, six years ago, she was talking about our world being in a moment of what she called protracted super density, dystopia and chaos all at once. And I think 2020 has brought that to a head. And I think when Anab was writing and talking about this in 2014, no one could have predicted where we would be now in 2020. And accompanying this, we've seen this big change in the last a decade or so, this loss of public space and this emergence of a new public space in this sort of digital space, the internet and the web. And certainly when I was growing up in the 1990s, that opportunity of that digital space was quite optimistic. We thought that what we called then cyberspace offered a utopian promise. But of course, as we've seen in the last 5 years, particularly, that public space has turned sour, and we see now digital space as very problematic and polluted and weaponized also. Coming, alongside that, we've also been living through this period where the city has become quantified and measured and surveilled. And also when we talk about culture, it's very difficult to talk about culture, particularly to governments and particularly to commercial interests, without quantifying it, without reducing it to numerical measures, be that financial measures or quantities of people passing through. But of course, culture is more than that. So I've seen throughout my career as museums are these opportunities to be democratic spaces. There are also spaces that I think are important to be seen not as necessarily tourist attractions, but as what I would call curiosity machines. A really good museum visit is one that makes you and your family and your friends think about things in a different way and awaken a curiosity. They aren't the end point of a journey, but they should be the beginning of a journey. I think that's one of the things that when I apply design methodologies and other practices to my work and my team's work, I always think of museums as the beginning rather than the end. And of course, museums are important because they offer persistence in an age where everything is becoming ephemeral, and we're seeing a great rush towards ephemerality. So museums are effectively about change, and I don't think we often think of museums as being about change. We see museums as places that are relatively static, but even when museums are being very conservative and not really doing anything, they're really keeping the old world in suspended animation, and that itself is about change. And of course, you know, we need non-commercial culture, non-commercial institutions like museums and galleries are incredibly important because they support critical creative work. And when those, as this quote says, when those are eroded by private interests and advertising, the public sphere as a whole suffers. And I would go further and suggest our sense of democracy suffers too. So if we go back to the beginning of my time working in museums in the year 2000, I was then based in Sydney, and I was working for this very large museum of history, design and science called the Powerhouse Museum. This was a large museum in Sydney that also ran the Sydney Observatory, had a very large collection. And my interests, my other parallel life has been in electronic music. So I was particularly excited to find they had these amazing vintage synthesizers there. And what was interesting about these synthesizers, and I guess what caught my imagination, was although these were relatively recent things from the 1970s and also the 1980s, you were never allowed to turn kind of them on, because there was always a fear that if you did, their circuits would break forever. Now, of course, that meant these instruments were silent and they would never be heard again. And so that very early on started me thinking about different ways we could bring these objects that were in suspended animation back to life. We were doing very early digitization. So this is some very early 3D digitization with very early scanners. And these are sort of very early prototypes of LiDAR scanners, or what I guess we would call LiDAR scanners now. So this is around 2002-3. And we were building these exhibitions. So these exhibitions that were very dense and very immersive in their own right, but they were dense with objects. They were very dense with cultural triggers. And we're also taking things. So this is an example from a photography exhibit that was at the Powerhouse, taking the photographs of Bruno Benini, an Australian fashion photographer, and one of my team, Paula Bray, created this amazing immersive mirrored experience where people walked through these projected photographs, but these projected photographs were projected with mirrors. So you got this really multi-dimensional feeling there. Around the same time, of course, with all of that digitization, museums and the Powerhouse was also doing this. And in fact, the Powerhouse led a lot of this work around the world, was putting their collections up on to the web. And these were relatively look very very static nowadays, but at kind of the time, the idea of putting all of your collection up on the web and making it available to everybody was seen as a relatively radical thing. And it was about this fear that museums had that if they put everything up on the internet, people wouldn't come. Now, that didn't, of course, turn out to be true at all. But this was informed by these principles of open access, open source, APIs, and open kind of design practices. So within that early period of 2000 to 2010, there was a lot of sharing within the cultural sector and a lot of sharing of ideas, of code, of methodologies. Also, I just put in this because, you know, QR codes are coming back with COVID and the notion of contact kind of tracing back in the Powerhouse days, and you can see how old this is by the old Nokia phone there. This is from 2009, where we started to use QR codes or experiment with QR codes in exhibitions there as a way of connecting visitors to the data the museum held. So this allowed the visitor to scan a QR code to, in quotes, find out more. Now we learned then that people didn't really want to use those. And I don't think much has actually changed there. So as I go on, this was really the era of websites still. So this is before really mobile, and it's the early period of social media. And I think, really following mobile in 2008-9, social media too radically changed. So the things that began to emerge in my practice then was this sense of, okay, so we've digitized the museum, we've put everything up on the web, or as much as we could. How do you then in perhaps repatriate objects from the museum back into the world itself? So in 2009, we did some very early experiments with augmented reality. Now this is very commonplace now, but this is sort of when the iPhone was beginning to land in Australia. So we took again a photographic collection, and that photographic collection had been geo kind of located, so attached to locations on maps, and that allowed people to move through Sydney and pull up on their phones those images from where they were standing. Now, it's very, very simple now to do that. But back in 2009, that started a sense of a new way of thinking about this notion of getting the contents of the museum and putting it back in to the world. And one of the things we learned during that period was, instead of digital lowering the demand for physical access to museums, it in fact increased the demand for it. But what changed was that when people who came to our websites, they began to ask to see things that we usually wouldn't put on exhibition. So many of you would kind of know that museums hold often huge amounts of collection of materials that never go on exhibition. And one of the challenges by making all of those catalogue records available was that people began to ask, well, I'd like to see this object, but you never put it out on show, so why not? So 2011, I got hired by the Smithsonian and moved to New York to help rebuild and reimagine this museum, which is a designed museum in New York, in Carnegie's old mansion house on the Upper East Side. So this is a pretty interesting museum. It's one of the Smithsonian stable of museums, so national, federally supported museums. But it's also quite quirky. So it has a collection, quite a large collection, which ranges from ceramic animals to graphic posters, some amazing poster art there, products and contemporary design, and of course more amazing weird ceramic animals. And this object from the early 20th century was a ceramic cat with a kitten, and this became the mascot for my team there. It animates well into a GIF. But like kind of the Powerhouse and like many other museums with large collections, a very small amount of their collection could ever be put on a public show. And we began to think about the museum itself as a physical interface. It was the building was an interface to an archive that was now also digitized. So when I arrived in New York, the museum was closed to do a big rebuild. And it was this sense of, could we redesign the museum to use the building as a gathering space and the network as a means of globally providing access and engagement to content and knowledge. So of course, again, similar to the Powerhouse, we put the collection up on a kind of line, digitize the entire thing, but then began to think about the building itself. So if everything was on the web, how might we design the building differently so that people could take advantage of that connection better? So we worked with a bunch of different design firms. And I think one of the interesting things about this was this notion that past experiences determine what users and customers expect things to, to be like. Now the Cooper Hewitt, because it's a very traditional looking building, doesn't feel like it's the sort of place that would have cutting edge contemporary design or digital design or these sorts of things. So the past experiences informed the visitors to the museum that this would be a historic traditional museum experience. So we needed to change that. So we made a magic wand. So we made this magic wand that worked a little bit like a library card. It was a pen, and it was the initial concept was from a New York design firm called Local Projects. And this was a really interesting intervention, because it was about taking this sense of, could you give visitors an object, a pen, that allowed them to do different things in this design museum, but also changed what they expected from the museum, that immediately reset their expectations. So here's an early video that the team did before the pen existed and was made. So it was this sort of sense, well, could you get the pen at the desk, and could you wear it? And when you found something you liked, could you collect it? And then could you explore that and see its relationship to other things in the Cooper Hewitt collection at any point during your kind of visit? Could you write notes about it? Could you save it and take it home, maybe take it home to school and keep on collecting? And the other thing is that would then mean that your phone would stay in your pocket. And you might be able to design things as well. That would be a cool idea. And then if you came back to the museum, would it remember that you had been there before? So that was sort of the idea of the pen. And the reality of the pen, of course, it involved doing a huge amount of industrial and product design to turn it into an object. It was designed with a firm in Spain and manufactured in Taipei. And the museum got 3,000 of these pens that are loaned out to visitors as they visited for free. And this is how it worked in 2015. So you could move through the museum. It was a nice black pen then. And you collected with the back of the pen, and those big tables are there, and you could explore those objects. And yes, you could draw and create things as well. And you could save and take home those creations too, as 3D models or as wallpapers and all sorts of things. It was actually pretty cool. Won a whole bunch of awards, but was actually used a lot. So, at the end of the day, what was interesting about this was visitors to the museum in the first year collected nearly 4 million things to take home with them. And so it started to bring together this notion of museums as these digital and physical spaces that you could reimagine and rethink with a mix of different design disciplines: architecture, spatial design, experience design, interaction design, and of course, importantly, service kind of design. And I think around this time too, this was around the time of the Snowden revelations and other things with the NSA and all these other things that really set up the stage for what was to come in 2016 and now through to now, was that design needed to be informed by a series of ethical practices. And Aral Balkan in 2017 released this ethical design manifesto manifesto, that when products and services are designed, it is very important that they are private, open, decentralized, sustainable, and they support human rights, as well as being, of course, functional and delightful as well. But if they don't have that bottom kind of layer, you can run into enormous problems, as we've seen with a lot of the tech sector and design sector now too. So in the design of this, in the design of the pen, we were really conscious of collecting the minimal possible data about visitors. So we didn't need to get their email addresses, their phone numbers, any of that. We minimized the data collected, and we were turning that around to return the greatest possible public benefit to those visitors without, as we said, then being kind of creepy. So 2015, late in 2015, I left kind of New York with my family and moved back to Australia. We moved to Melbourne, where I was employed to help again reimagine this museum, formerly known as the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, now kind of known by its acronym ACMI. And it is the National Museum of Film, TV, Video Games, Digital Culture. So it's a museum of screens. And being a museum of screens, really what that meant in 2015 was it was a museum of everything that you could watch or play on your phone in your pocket. So it was by default a digital first museum for that period. We've rethought that in our rebrand, and it's this sort of sense of being your museum of screen to culture. So instead of being about film, TV, and video games, it's really a museum of everything screen to culture. Hugely visited. So pre-COVID, many visitors, 1.5 million a year. And it's made up of 3 exhibition galleries, two cinemas, labs, studios, co-working space, which I'll talk about in a second, as well as retail and cafe. And in this redesign and rebuild, we've added another 2 galleries, one as a web gallery as well. So with that, the museum builds exhibitions. So this is an exhibition on video game makers, auteurs in the video game world. This has been touring around the world since kind of 2012. And this DreamWorks exhibit that was in Brazil in 2019 and was the most visited exhibition in the world in Brazil for the top twice, in fact, which was quite amazing. So that's also one of our exhibitions that was built with kind of DreamWorks studios, and looks at how DreamWorks does their animation practices. So co-working space as well. This was set up in 2016. So in our offices, the museum has a co-working space which incubates and hosts and provides accelerator support for people working in film, TV, video games, creative technology, and media technologies. So it's this co-working space has been about bringing the practitioners that the museum is for and about inside the sort of museum itself. So you'll find curators pre-COVID working alongside a filmmaker, or curators working alongside a video game maker or an animator, or a virtual reality creator. So coming into this museum that isn't about objects, but is about media and screens, we became immediately aware of the new types of art that were emerging and these new types of media commissions. So the top left is a 2-channel work by Daniel Crooks. The top right is a AI generated documentary where the narrative plays out in different ways each kind of time it plays. It's a single channel work of about between 20 and 30 minutes. The bottom left is a soda jerk work which takes apart Australian film and television to create a 1-hour-long post-colonial feminist mashup, which is hilarious and really good if you ever get a chance to see it. Hopefully it'll be on kind of line at some point soon. It's been touring festivals around the world. The bottom right was a two-person virtual reality experience that was actually a theatre production that had been recorded as a VR experience. So these new works that were really not only deeply experiential, but were also software. And around this time too, we began experimenting with this sense of building more immersive experiences as exhibitions. So why would a museum like this build exhibitions? So for us, exhibitions are these semi-spatial, non-kind of linear narrative experiences, and they're there, as I said at the start, to inspire curiosity. They're not to answer a question necessarily, but they're just to inspire curiosity. Why interactive experiences? Well, you know, I think that's driven by this sense of people learning through doing. And as we notice, particularly with a museum of media, is the intergenerational social learning. And this happens in all types of museums, but it's been particularly fascinating with video games in that we will have grandparents and parents talking about the old computers and consoles they might have grown up with, or arcade games, and talking to their kids or grandkids who are like, really? That really isn't a very fun game at all. And, you know, all that. But also as one of my exhibit designer friends talks about, that the interactive experiences create this sense of visitor chemistry. So this is this notion where a good exhibition or a good experience is one where strangers feel comfortable enough to speak to each other about things. And so it's that sense of creating, as you might get in a well-designed public park or a public square, this sense that strangers have an opportunity to meet and talk, and you might do this in virtual spaces too. Why immersive? So, you know, immersive has been a big thing in experience design, and this goes from experiential marketing through to museums and theatre. And this has been in museum spaces and in the work that I do, particularly at my museum, is this sense of creating a distinction between the outside world beyond the museum and the world of the exhibition itself. So this is the inverse or the flip of the work at the Powerhouse, which was about getting the objects of the museum back into the world. This is about dividing the world into the museum space and the rest of the world and creating a separation. And this sense from game theory that if could the museum be a magic circle where the visitors attain superpowers when they're in that space, and what might that be? And if you think back to what I was saying about the pen at Cooper Hewitt, that was very much about this notion of visitors attaining superpowers by using this pen there. Okay, so this notion, you know, we're starting to think about magic and think about spectacle, but in a lot of the work more recently, we've been trying to simplify things and say that there's this sort of opportunities for spectacular magic within that exhibition space, but also very simple stuff. And I think being in a museum that's so heavily dominated by media and screens, the analog itself has a lot of really interesting possibilities. So we talk about re-enchanting the analog, and I'll show some examples in a second. So this is an exhibit that we built in 2017. It's been touring around Asia. It may go to Europe and North and South America, depending on what happens with COVID and depending on what happens with travel. This is an exhibition about Lewis Carroll stories, and the way Lewis Carroll stories, particularly Alice, have been appear in different films, TV shows, Japanese J-pop music videos, and lots of other things. And whilst it has these great media experiences, this 24 screen video essay piece done by that was just playing then, that was done in house, through to traditional things, objects, props, costumes from the various films and TV series, and immersive room scale projection mapping. So this is the famous tea party done by a Sydney firm called Grumpy Sailor. So this was a projection mapped experience where visitors would step inside and sit for about a 10-minute, 5, 6, 7-minute experience, which would create a world around them and project on both the table and the walls. And that would then reveal the way CGI and computer graphics are used to create different experiences within an animation, for example. We also had a lot of paper experiences in this. So this is a craft experience towards the end of that exhibition, which allowed you to create a character, and then using facial recognition cameras would map your face on to the character that you had made. Now that was built working off this paper map. So at the Cooper Hewitt, we gave people an electronic pen that was expensive and complicated. Here we gave people to take home a paper map. So this paper map was the surface that they used for the craft activities. It was also a guide and a story guide through the exhibition itself. And it was also a magic surface. So here's the map, and you would come to these particular points, you'd place your map down, and your map would come to life. And so it was this sort of sense of magic coming into the world through this paper device. And when you got home, you took your map home, and on your ticket, you would get a secret code. You put in your secret code, and you would get everything that you had seen and done, as well as extended features. So this is like, I guess, the DVD or Blu-ray bonus features, and lots of links out to other things. So it was this sense of giving you more than just the exhibition itself, but you got this sort of secret guide to everything beyond the exhibition. Because if you'd been to the show, you know, we wanted you to have a great time within the exhibition itself, but we also wanted you to become curiouser and curiouser, so to speak. The other thing that we hid in the world, which I think was interesting, and we didn't know how this would go, was an alternate reality game. So we've hid a bunch of clues and a bunch of riddles in the design, in the wallpapers, little things written on things in around the exhibition space, and didn't talk about it at all. The visitor guides didn't say anything about it. If anyone asked, what does that mean? They would just say, I'm not sure. But those people who were really super fans uncovered the secrets, and in the map there also were hidden clues as well, and there were a series of tasks, and if you did those tasks you would be asked to send in a letter to us. And of course we didn't promote or say anything about this, and we got a huge amount of letters about this, which was really fun. And you know, this sort of sense of, we knew this was successful because people went to that effort of becoming this sort of super fan. Anyway, so this sort of enchantment and extension was key to us. And that's because, you know, museums' currency, we trade in time to watch, play and experience. And for museums, it's really important to value that time that people give us and return that gift of time in ways that generate more value and curiosity for them. So this, this at the heart of all of this, just despite all the things that we've done with digital and with experience design, there's a lot of staff change and ways of thinking. So computational thinking, data literacies and design literacies have become really key within the organization. And now this isn't just about digital transformation. This is about building new types of literacies and new types of ways of thinking about possibility. So the museum's been on this five-year journey of change. So the museum's been closed now for a year and maybe a year and a half with COVID. And during that time, we've done an enormous rebuild. And this has been 5 years in the making. So here's a little bit of how it was planned to look. So, quite a radical architectural change to the museum. This will open in a couple of months. New objects and design, new immersive and playful experiences throughout that explore the past, present, and future. Education labs and learning labs, new interactive experiences. Really telling the story of Australian film, TV, and video games and media. This is a response. This museum is now a response and a provocation around this, and it lives within this screen-dominated culture, screen-dominated politics, network society, these issues around bias, filter bubbles, and of course, in a sense of climate collapse. So we're working in this very turbulent and super dense period, as I said at the start with Anna kind of Jane's quote. This super dense period where all of these pressures and issues are all coming at once. This is a museum which needs to respond to those. And so we've done this shift. So we've done this shift away from machine to curation and leaning into the digital, and instead leaning in on the human and putting human curation and opinion first. So the transparency of our curators' opinions, why they chose things, and what they didn't choose is out and up kind of front. And we've been using and designing network technologies, again, as I said, to extend curiosity. So we're very explicit that if you visit ACMI, we want to change the things you might choose to go home and watch or play after you've visited the museum. And to that end, similar to the Cooper Hewitt pen, every visitor gets a lens. So they get a lens to take home. And the lens design is based on these early 19th century optical toys, the early version, I guess, of a GIF, and these Viewmaster reels. And it looks a little like this. So it's made of cardboard. It's fully recyclable. And as you move through the museum experience, you can collect everything, take it home, watch or play it later. So this is the lens. This is little instructional video. It lets you collect everything that you see at kind of the museum. So as you move through, you tap to collect, and you keep on collecting throughout your visit. And when you get home, very similar to the map, that the paper map, you just log in with your code, and you can play, watch, and explore all of the things that you've collected and more. So what's interesting, I guess, beyond the things that you've collected is that we also make recommendations of other films, TV shows, art, and games that you might want to play based on the things that you have collected. And this is in the gallery space. There is an experience, the constellation, which connects the objects that you've collected and the media you've collected up to a universe of screen content. Log in when you get home, keep watching and playing. And the website for this has just gone live. And this is the sort of, again, the website experience here, even though the museum is still not open, is really like a magazine. And I've previously said that we're a little bit like at kind of the moment, a magazine that happens to have a museum attached. So here's a series of essays and articles. This is one about a television show in Australia called The Family Law, about immigrant experiences. It's a very funny comedy show. And in the exhibition itself, as we'll get to in a second, you can see these objects here, these works, costumes and props. And the website itself lets you explore those, but what it also does is links out to where you can stream and watch that show. So immediately from the museum experience, you can go and start watching that TV series. This happens to be in Chinese. So that sort of sense of, again, connecting the museum up to the rest of the world and the rest of the internet. So that's so we should open early 2021. Of course, if COVID hadn't happened, we would have been open by now, and I would have a very, very different talk. But it is this sort of sense again of that museum that is connected up with the digital space and the internet, but also really playing to the strengths of the physical space and that sense of the museum as a social experience, and the museum as a physical experience, a physical experience that generates and allows our communities to discover things that they didn't know about or didn't know they were interested in. So thanks a lot, and I think I've just finished ahead of time. So thank you. You can find me on Twitter, and feel free to send me any questions you might have. Thank you.